Allow me, therefore, to introduce the head of delegation and to deliver his keynote address, Dr. Benjamin Diokno, the current Minister of Finance. His academic journey began in the University of the Philippines, where he obtained his bachelor's degree in public administration, his master's degree in public administration and economics. He obtained his MA in political economy from the Johns Hopkins University in Maryland, USA, his PhD in economics from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University in New York, USA. He served as an advisor and consultant to multilateral agencies such as the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the European Commission, the U.S. Agency for International Development, for work in transitioning economies. In the Philippine government, Secretary Diokno served as Vice Minister for Budget, then as Minister for Budget under 3 presidents, where he pursued an expansionary fiscal policy to finance investments in human capital development and public infrastructure. He also served as Philippine Central Bank Governor, which enabled the Philippines to deploy decisive measures to cushion against the adverse impacts of the pandemic and pave the way to the road to recovery. As Minister of Finance now, Secretary Diokno seeks to achieve upper middle income status for the Philippines under the Marcos administration and to achieve a brand of inclusive and sustainable growth and equity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm therefore proud and honored to introduce, to deliver his keynote speaker, Secretary of Finance, Dr. Benjamin Diokno. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The Philippine Economic Team is thrilled to mount our first Philippine Economic Briefing in the Middle East here in Dubai, the busiest gateway into the region and one of the best places in the world to do business. The United Arab Emirates is an important economic partner of the Philippines. It is home to some 700,000 Filipino residents and workers in highly skilled sectors such as healthcare, hospitality, and construction. In fact, the UAE is the 6th largest source of remittances from overseas Filipino workers, with total cash remittances reaching $1.4 billion in 2022. It also ranks as the Philippines' 17th major trading partner, 21st largest exporter market, and 16th largest importer-supplier. Today, I'm eager to introduce the Dubai and UAE business community to the Philippines, one of the fastest-growing emerging markets and investment hubs in Southeast Asia. In 2022, the Philippine economy registered its highest full-year growth in 46 years at 7.6% of GDP, surpassing the country's pre-pandemic output level. The Philippine economy continues to grow amid the global economic slowdown, growing by 5.3% in the first semester of 2023. Domestic demand continues to underpin the country's economic growth. Strong consumption has continued to lift demand, expanding by 5.5%, fueled by improving labor and employment conditions, strong overseas Filipino remittances, and pent-up demand. The Philippines' growth during this period outpaced Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, and Singapore. This gives us confidence that the Philippine economy can rise above the tide and achieve the government's growth target of 6 to 7% this year and 6.5 to 8% from 2024 to 2028. International organizations share our optimism. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund both hiked their growth outlook on the Philippines to 6% and 6.2%, respectively, despite the slower growth in advanced economies. Major credit rating agencies have continued to affirm the Philippines' credit worthiness and sound macroeconomic fundamentals. Just last month, Japan-based debt watcher RNI admitted the country's BBB plus rating and revised its outlook from stable to positive. In May 2023, Fitch Ratings affirmed its BBB rating on the Philippines and upgraded the outlook from negative to stable, owing to the country's strong growth prospects, sound economic policy framework, and prudent debt management. Our jobs market is bright. In July 2023, the unemployment rate remained low at 4.8%. We continue to maintain high labor participation rate at 60.1% and a low underemployment rate at 15.9%. The Philippine labor force is young, with a median age of 25, English proficient, highly trainable, and tech-savvy. The current demographic sweet spot will fuel the country's economic growth. Now, the Philippine government is determined to sustain this by attracting job-generating investments, enhancing the ease of doing business in the country, and boosting productivity through investments in infrastructure and human capital development. The Philippine government has established a liberal investment environment to open up the economy to foreign players. The amendments to the Retail Trade Liberalization Act simplify the qualification requirements and reduce the minimum paid-up capital requirements for foreign retailers from $2.5 million to $500,000. Meanwhile, we amended the Foreign Investments Act. It has reduced the scope of investments subject to review, provides flexibility and transparency in the adjustment of the foreign investment negative list, and liberalizes the practice of professions. Finally, the Public Service Act was amended. This allows full 100% foreign ownership of public services such as telecommunications, toll roads, expressways, shipping, and airports. We have also opened up the renewable energy sector to full foreign ownership to quicken our transition to clean energy. And this includes the exploration, development, and utilization of solar, wind, hydro, and ocean or tidal energy resources. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has put infrastructure development at the center of the Philippines' strategy for economic transformation. Smart, climate-proof, and interconnected infrastructure boosts productivity, improves the quality of life, builds livable communities, and drives growth in both the rural areas and urban centers. Dubbed as the Build Better More program, bringing this massive infrastructure drive to life requires innovative financing solutions and strategic co-investments with the private sector. Adequate public investment in infrastructure is critical to this endeavor. We've seen the flip side. On average, from 2001 to 2015, we spent a meager 2% of GDP on infrastructure. 2% of GDP. And this is why the Philippines lag behind its ASEAN peers. But in 2016, the previous administration made a commitment to aggressively and rapidly pursue infrastructure development. allowing us to build infrastructure spending to above 5% of GDP. And this created more jobs and stimulated high economic growth. The Marcos Jr. administration is building on this momentum. In fact, the commitment to maintain public spending in infrastructure at 5 to 6% of GDP annually is embedded in the current Philippines medium-term fiscal program. The government has identified 197 priority infrastructure flagship projects with a total investment requirement of about $155 billion US dollars. $155 billion US dollars. These priority infrastructure projects focus on unlocking greater economic productivity through physical connectivity, digital connectivity, health, power and energy, agriculture, flood management, water supply, and irrigation. The Marcos Jr. administration has made it a policy thrust to wield the power of public-private partnerships to help boost the development of much-needed infrastructure in our priority sectors. To do this effectively, we are establishing a stable and predictable public-private partnership policy environment that aims to bring about better quality infrastructure and services, while allowing private players to get a reasonable rate of return on their investment. We've made necessary reforms to the PPP policy environment early into this administration. Within the first 100 days of the Marcos administration, we revised the implementing rules and regulations of the Build, Operate, Transfer law, the framework that governs our PPPs. Second, we revised the Investment Coordination Committee's guidelines on approving PPP proposals, cutting bureaucratic red tape and streamlining the approval process. Third, we enhanced the NEDA joint venture guidelines to align with the revised implementing rules and regulations of the Build, Operate, Transfer law and the proposed Public-Private Partnership Act. And finally, we are pushing for simpler regulations and procedures on infrastructure projects through the proposed Public-Private Partnership Act. This bill is now pending before the Senate of the Philippines and is expected to be approved very soon. Now, these reforms allow for the speedy approval of projects, uphold high standards of transparency and accountability, enhance the bankability of PPP projects for private partnerships, ensure optimal risk allocation between the government and the private sector. Now, out of the 197 infrastructure flagship projects that I mentioned earlier, 39 will be undertaken through public-private partnerships. And I invite you to take a look at the NEDA's infrastructure flagship project dashboard online to explore investment opportunities in physical connectivity, health, and water resources. Since the beginning of the President's term, we have already approved 4 PPP proposals with a total project cost of $3.8 billion US dollars. 2 of these PPP proposals were evaluated in record time. The solicited proposal for the rehabilitation of the Ninoy Aquino International Airport, the Philippine capital's main gateway, was evaluated and approved in around 6 weeks. Meanwhile, the unsolicited proposal for the Tarlac-Pangasinan-La Union Expressway, or what we call TPLEX Extension Project, was evaluated and approved within just 11 weeks. Aside from the PPPs, the Philippines is open to investments from both domestic and global firms engaged in strategically important projects and activities. The Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or the CREATE Act, reduced the corporate income tax rates from 30% to 20% for domestic micro, small, and medium enterprises, and from 30% to 25% for other corporations. This much-needed reform has benefited 99% of the country's employers and made our corporate tax rates competitive with our ASEAN neighbors. A critical feature of this reform is the rationalization of fiscal incentives system. It has introduced an enhanced single menu of fiscal and non-fiscal incentives that is performance-based, time-bound, targeted, and transparent. Since the enactment of this new corporate tax regime, the government has approved and granted incentives to 45 big-ticket projects with a total committed investment capital of $13.4 billion. Furthermore, 740 projects with investment capital of 1 billion pesos or less have been approved by investment promotion agencies, and this amounts to $3.3 billion in total investment capital. The Strategic Investment Priority Plan identifies preferred industries, projects, and activities that can be granted tax incentives. Investments in the countryside and investment in highly advanced and technology-enabled projects and activities are given high priority and consequently higher and longer incentives. Incentives are given to projects covering research and development and those adopting advanced digital production technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, such as, but not limited to, artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, data analytics, cloud computing, nanotechnology, and investments in digital infrastructure, among others. The CREATE Act also provides for a 40-year tax incentive package for highly desirable projects or activities with investment capital of about $900 million, or if it creates jobs of at least 10,000. This is subject to the approval of the President. In addition, just this year, the President signed an executive order mandating the establishment of green lanes for strategic investments to clear the pathway for highly desirable projects, foreign direct investments, or activities under the Strategic Investment Priority Plan. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce the Maharlika Investment Fund, the Philippines' first ever sovereign investment fund, and this was signed into law by President early this year. The fund will serve as an additional source and mode of financing priority projects of the Philippine government, including our infrastructure flagship projects. These projects offer high rates of return and significant socioeconomic impact. The fund aims to attract the participation of local and foreign capital, large global funds, global financial institutions, multilateral partners, and other sovereign wealth funds to make direct equity investments in the Philippine ventures and projects. The Maharlika Investment Fund can also be used for green and blue projects, countryside development, and emerging megatrends such as the ESG and cutting-edge technologies. We have published the implementing rules and regulations of the Maharlika Investment Fund Act last month, defining its governance structure, investment policy and guidelines, and safeguard measures of the fund. We look forward to filling in the positions at the helm of the Maharlika Investment Corporation, and we look forward to operationalizing the fund before the end of the year. With the Philippines' favorable demographic profile, open investment regime, thrust for public-private partnerships, and diverse investment and financing mode, we present a wellspring of investment opportunities for the Middle East business community. We look forward to productive discussions today and forging new partnerships with you in the coming years. Shukran Jazilan.